In the case of nuclear or radiological fallout, people living around potential targets such as military bases and chemical plants may be advised to evacuate.
Hello, Sublation media viewers and all of you readers and thinkers out there. It's I, Douglas Lane, the novelist behind Bash Bash Revolution and the head of Sublation Media.
And it is I, Ashley Frawley, where my green screen is missing from the corner there, and it's really bugging me. I'm Ashley Frawley. I am Associate Professor of Sociology, Social Policy, and Criminology at Swansea University for the last day. Today is the last day that I will be Associate Professor. I'm leaving my nice, cushy, what Americans would call tenured position for a visiting position at the Center for Parenting Culture Studies at the University of Kent. And I'm also a visiting research fellow at MCC Brussels, which is evil. And you can go and Google and find out how I've gone over to the dark side. No, but I do research there on family policy in the EU. So this is the one place that I have some overlap with the I suppose the cultural right. In that I believe that families matter to people and that we shod care about families.
Yeah, thanks for warning me ahead of time. You're going to make that announcement at the beginning of the stream. So this week we are going to be talking again about the Hamas Gaza-Israel crisis. Our two podcasts since the attack from Hamas on Israel have been controversial. They've also been popular, and we've gotten, I would say, an equal amount of praise for our attempt to think through the crisis as we've gotten criticism. To begin with, I just want to say that at the moment, the big question, I think, on everyone's mind is whether or not Hamas' apparent intentions will be realized, and whether or not a regional war will be the ultimate consequence of the terrorist attack or the militant attack, the attack from Hamas on Israel, or whether some cooler heads will prevail and a more restrained approach from Israel will quash the mounting tensions, and we can avoid escalation. At the moment, it does not look at all good for the future. Israel is not seeming to do anything other than murder civilians in Gaza, and seems quite prepared to escalate the conflict. But there are calls from the United States, from the Biden administration, from the UK, both parties, the prime minister and the head of the opposition, and Chinese officials have all called for Israel to temper its approach, to be restrained. I saw something that indicated that China has said that even the attacks that have taken place so far do not constitute self-defense, but go well beyond the right of Israeli self-defense. I think that's unquestionable at this point. So that's the lay of the land. And the question for the left, I think, is whether or not the left wants to stay the course with Hamas, the radical anti-imperial left that was so vocal on my Twitter feed, and which I think has been amongst our critics. Those are the ones who've been most critical of us as the people who want to support Hamas's attack as the only option open for Palestinians to decolonize Israel, if we want to hold with that line and see a regional conflict emerge, or if a more restrained approach and a de-escalation is what we would want to support. And it's, I guess, a strategic question, but it also goes to what our aims are. So that's what I think I want to put up. That's the frame I want to put around our conversation. But Ashley, you can put some other frames around this as well. Can you hear me?
I think that, yeah, I can hear you. I just think that my microphone, for some reason, just lost the connection.
Yeah, I should point out that I am not in my usual location. I went to visit my 2 daughters in Eugene, and so I'm on one of my daughter's laptop, and their office here in their apartment, and that's why the sound isn't as good as usual, or maybe even the picture quality isn't as good as it might have been. But nonetheless, I'm making do, and I hope everyone will put up with the bad sound. Uh-oh, your microphone's gone out. My laptop is more successful than your microphone at the moment. Did you press the button before that got your microphone to
Did it work? Is it working now?
It's working now.
Is it working now?
Yeah.
I don't understand why. I didn't touch a darn thing. I swear to God, my setup just hates me.
No,
I have been trying to figure this out for ages. Anyways, okay. So Doug, after a week of kind of reflecting on everything, what do you think the answer to that question is?
I think that we should hope for a de-escalation, and that a world war would not present any opportunities for the development of socialism. That's my starting point, really, but I'm willing to hear arguments from the chat that might push against that. I talked to Conrad Hamilton, and he argued that that Hamas was the only force that could decolonize Israel, that it might be present. It was kind of contradictory, because he also said that it might present China with an opportunity to step forward as a major world power and lead and create conditions for de-escalation. So I'm not sure. Frankly, I don't think most of the people who were most vocal in supporting the attacks at the beginning as the only option for decolonization are being consistent in their approach to it now. I think that most everyone would like to see de-escalation, but what do you think?
I would hope so. It seems to me that is the most sane approach that you could possibly take, and yet it's like, I don't know, if you just spend too much time online and don't touch grass frequently, it can seem like you don't belong in polite society unless you're screeching for more blood. It's just absolutely insane. This idea that, well, first of all, what pissed me off too is like watching the news all week and people being like, Israel has a right to, what was the word that they used, kept using? It wasn't just defend itself. It was, oh, Israel has a right to respond. And it's just like tit for fucking tat, right? Tit for tat, tit for tat. Is this really what anybody wants to be egging on? You have a right to revenge is what you're demanding. But at the same time, like I can understand why the group that represents a just and noble cause, why you would feel compelled to see them as a good force. But I don't think Hamas is a good force. I mean, if Israeli officials are to be believed, I'm not sure if it's true. Perhaps people in the chat can tell me. But they are specifically telling families to stay in, dangerous areas and be martyrs. This is a death cult. This is not a progressive force. This isn't something to champion. The Palestinian cause is something to champion, but that may be something separate from what Hamas has in mind.
Yeah,
that's a lie, actually.
Some people are pointing out that no one really supports Hamas on the left, that there isn't much of a left, that the pro-Hamas anti-imperialist left is a lunatic fringe, someone says. Everyone within the Democratic Party who has any political power, like the Squad, has standing behind. Now, see, this is interesting, behind the Zionist lobby and the DNC, which may be somewhat true about the Zionist lobby. But another person asked, what would the right for self-defense even mean in the Israeli context? And that is a serious question. Okay, that's like a very important question to ask, because that question is going to perhaps determine whether or not there's going to be an escalation of the conflict.
And that's what I mean with the right to respond, because they weren't saying defend themselves, they were saying respond, which had this taste of retaliation.
Right, exactly. But a right to defend themselves would need to be, I guess, if that's going to be determined in reality by Iran. It's going to be determined. What the right to defend themselves amounts to will be determined by Iran. It will be determined by the United States and the UK and China and the world international community at large. But China, all the different players that might be drawn into this conflict are going to decide at what point Israel's response goes beyond the right to defend themselves and requires some sort of action. And the United States is looking for ways to hold Israel back from a full-scale invasion of Gaza and to constrain the response, because the United States doesn't want to enter into a regional conflict or to be a player in a war in Israel, between Israel and say Iran. And there's real concern that an overreaction of one that can only be seen as retribution will push for an escalation of the conflict. And most of the major imperial powers do not want that. That includes China. I think that may even include Russia. I'm not sure, but I don't think anyone is looking to a major conflict right now to reshuffle the dynamic of power on the world stage, to create that multipolar world in one blow. That doesn't seem to me to be in the offing. So the question then becomes, for everyday people who just want to live their lives in relative peace, what can we hope for? Where are the spots of light? Some moments where we can say there's some hope. And for socialists, the question is, I think, what are the kinds of conditions that we would want to see develop to help our long-term goal of developing a socialist party, a socialist revolutionary movement, and eventually a socialist world. And do we think that a multipolar world, the defeat of U.S. hegemony and U.S. Israeli hegemony, maybe, would be a necessary step along the road?
So there's some interesting comments that are trying to respond to that. So someone says, I'm not a Palestinian nationalist, don't support Hamas. I support unity of Arab and Jewish workers against the bourgeoisie. Now, I said before we started the stream that I would, because I had been looking at the comments of our previous stream and sort of responding to them, that I would lead this. But now here I am sort of asking you back and forth questions. But you had said in your kind of, armchair, to totally, making it clear, it's just an armchair thought, but that you said that perhaps a one-state solution might be something to favor. Is that what that person is kind of getting at there?
Sorry, I got distracted by the 1999 donated question. Can I address that, and then you can re-ask me the question about?
Sure. Yes. Go ahead. Yeah. Oh, sorry.
While the left can disagree with Hamas, but our focus should be instead on why guerrilla groups feel, that's the wrong kind of guerrilla. Guerrilla groups feel so cornered and desperate that they would respond in such a way, and what, if anything, we can do to change those conditions. Right. Well, I don't know if it's the case that the primary cause. I mean, in a sense, it is the case that Hamas and was feeling cornered and desperate, and that is why they attacked. But my understanding is that at least one of the factors involved was the normalizations of relations between Saudi Arabia and Israel, that the process for normalization that was going on, and the way in which that would create the possibility of further normalizations between Israel and the Arab world or the Islamic world, without addressing the Palestinian struggle for self-determination. So there was a feeling that the de-escalation of tensions between Israel and other nations needed to be interrupted in order to make sure that the fight for Palestinian national liberation wasn't forgotten. And so I think that's the answer for why they felt cornered and desperate, was because of the process of normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. At least one of the reasons they did, and that meant that their struggle was being sidelined by the Islamic world, or they felt that that was a possible outcome, which was that their struggle would be, thrown into the dustbin of history, which meant the permanent apartheid state in Israel would continue. Also, Daniel Jacobs says the point is the U.S. was already leaving that region. The Abraham Accord, Saudi normalization, the attempt to return to the JCPOA, or all the pivot out of the Middle East, right? So that's another way to look at it, was that the United States was leaving the region, tensions were declining, there was a process of normalization, and this is a way to draw the United States back in to the Middle East, to insist upon the region still being a major focus of the world. I think that's what Daniel's getting to. But go back to your question about the one state solution, maybe.
Yeah, so this person said, I'm not for Hamas. I'm not a nationalist. I want Arab and Jewish workers to fight against the bourgeoisie, more or less. And I asked, is that something that would be favored by a one-state solution?
I think it would be, but I also think that
sort of like bourgeois kind of approach to history of like passing through liberalism.
Right. I mean, the question is, would a two-state solution be a more direct path towards the Palestinian development of a representative bourgeois state with rights for all Palestinians, and help develop workers' movements for political power within the context of two states? Or would there be more of an opportunity through a one-state approach? And I'm not real. I don't know. But I tend to agree with people who know more than I do that, for instance, Noam Chomsky, who has said that the one-state solution is the only viable option still on the table, and just what that would mean, it is complicated. And I wouldn't, in this moment, it would definitely mean we don't want to escalate a war between Hezbollah and Iran and Israel and perhaps the United States and the UK. But the UK has been relatively clear. I mean, they're making a big point out of the opening up of a path out of Gaza, a humanitarian option. I forget what they call it exactly, but the point is to create a zone where refugees can be relatively secure and leave Gaza. And I would say that is a bare minimum demand from the West that if there's some sort of alleviating of the lockdown and the blockade, meaning they'll allow people to leave the country, they'll maybe get more aid in, they'll set up refugee camps in Egypt. All of that together is not nearly enough to justify an Israeli invasion of Gaza. And so if that's the negotiation point, like please, allow these people to leave and go live in horrible conditions and refuge, rather than just being killed by soldiers. I don't think that's that's not a demand that goes nearly far enough. And frankly, I'm not even sure that there would be a way to stop refugees getting out of Gaza, short of mowing them down with Egyptian armaments,
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing that's the most disturbing about this. It's like, again, need to touch grass, because the vast majority of people are like, normal people are like, we just want the killing to stop. Can we find ways to stop the killing? Can we, is there some way that we can get to a table at some point? But if you just like spend too much time online, it was like, I just had to shut it all down. I'm not the only person too. I know a friend of ours has deleted his Twitter because it was just so fucked up. It was just, the rhetoric was insane. And it was like, either like Israel gets wiped off the map or Palestine gets wiped off the map. And like, you were just called every name in the book if you didn't support one of those options. And it was like, what the fuck? It's like either side seemed to be taking it as a reason to have a that's it, let's have the decisive conflict, the final solution. What? And this is of course all internet rhetoric. And I have actually screenshotted some of this internet discourse, because I know people are like, nobody says that. And whenever somebody then says that to me, I go, thank you for saying this to me, because you are proof that people are saying this. But anyways, I think
two comments real quick. And so Sam Badger says, would it be worth it for the American Marxists to see it from the point of view of the global South broadly and the Palestinians more narrowly? And I don't think that anything that we've said excludes the interests of the global South or Palestinians. So I want to know why emphasizing the need to constrain Israel's invasion of Gaza and try to de-escalate the situation and to avoid a regional and perhaps world war is not me taking up the point of view of global South. I think this is nearly it. And maybe this arose in a moment when I was saying something specific that they were responding to, but as it stands right now, it just seems to me to be sloganeering without thought behind it. And South African anti-apartheid movements were labeled terrorists, and I'm sure many on the Western left consider them that as well. Well, in the stream with in the podcast with Chris Cutrone, we went back and forth on what constitutes terrorism, and by international law and by U.S. law, terrorism is pretty broadly defined. I think shock and awe in Iraq, that policy was a terrorist policy. Anytime you're trying to terrify the civilian population in order to create, achieve a political outcome, you are acting as a terrorist. So the definition moves around. So when I talk about a terror attack, I'm not saying these people have lost all rights. I'm not saying that it justifies any response we want to throw at it. Terrorism has been a regular part of warfare since World War I, at least, in terms of civilian bombing. And it's, again, the presumption here, the hidden assumption is that if we call someone a terrorist, if we noticed the tactic being used, then we are justifying some particular response. And we're stripping the people labeled as terrorists of their rights, or the people that they're supposedly representing of their human dignity. And I have no intention to do either of those things. After the attacks of 9/11, I was amongst those who most vocally opposed. I don't know how many people heard me, but I made an effort to get out and protest the creation of the category of enemy combatants, to fight the Patriot Act, and to oppose both the invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. So I'm not in any way trying to justify any particular draconian or inhumane or terroristic response from Israel or the United States by pointing to the truth of the character of the attack by Hamas.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to say too, like, people were really mad at me, even though I hardly said anything on the last stream. I was just asking questions. And I said at the beginning, I'm not going to wax lyrical about it. I'm just going to listen to what people have to say. And I do think, by the way, I do want to talk about anti-Semitism. I do want to talk about anti-Semitism. Okay. And if you don't want to talk about it, you've been blinkered a little bit. But anyways, I have to tell you, like, people are like, no, this is the most obvious stance. The most obvious stance as a leftist is that you are pro-Palestinian, that you always support the lowest of the low. Okay, that's second thing is wrong, and I'll explain why in a moment. People said to me, as a Marxist, it's a no-brainer that you always support the most oppressed. This is incorrect. But the first point about always supporting Palestine. Now, when I was younger and I was a knee-jerk leftist, that is, I considered myself to be, and I'm saying very young, like teenager, and I was becoming political. I adopted all of these positions, as a progressive and aware, in a very depoliticized climate. I was a very aware individual by being anti-American, by being pro-Palestine, being anti-Israel. And I do think that anti-Israel stance that I took as like a sort of knee-jerk automatic position of like, oh, here's your card, here's your leftist, here are your positions. It did bleed into a little bit of anti-Semitism when I met people from Israel, I did think to myself, like, you're a bad person. That you are living on like stolen land, this sort of thing. I did think that it was like all Israeli people I thought were basically complicit. This was like stupid, knee-jerk. It's embarrassing to admit this, but this is how I thought when I was a teenager. And here's another even more embarrassing thing. After 9/11 happened, although I was sad, I felt that the Americans deserved it. And if I had been slightly more politically on the ball, I might even have celebrated it. I wasn't, though. At least I had a shred of humanity left in me. But it's so disgusting. And I never fully reflected on this stance that I had just taken as a young person until I traveled with a friend of mine who was American, and she told me straight up, you need to stop being anti-American. It's not cool. I didn't even notice. Like, I just thought, oh, everybody who knows stuff is anti-American, right? Fucking idiot. And then the other thing was many years later, after I sort of grew up and grew out of these things, started thinking a little bit more about the positions that I took, obviously. I went to the 9/11 memorial. And I know this is so cliche, but I was pregnant at the time. And I read one of the engravings, and I can't remember the name, but it was like name and her unborn baby. And I started crying because I was like, what a fucking idiot kid I was. Like, how stupid could I possibly have been? And so I have been through these positions that people are begging me to adopt. You should be glad that the oppressed have hit out against the oppressor. But even then, like, even in the idiotic response to 9/11, people didn't cheer on the Taliban. I know I'm taking really shallow positions here, but I'm just responding to some of the negative comments that we got last week that were like, oh, you should be glad that this is how the oppressor, lashes out, or the oppressed lashes out. Like, yeah, it's understandable, but it's not justifiable. It's like you're saying, like, these people had to die. Like, this is collateral, acceptable, and even welcome collateral damage for the cause. And both things can be wrong here.
Yeah, the thing to remember is, like, right now, I've heard a few people say, in the establishment of in Israel, and also in the U.S. establishment, that Benjamin Netanyahu's days are numbered due to the attacks, and the reason that the attacks from Hamas are going to perhaps end Netanyahu's reign is because they're so horrible. That people understand that he is responsible for protecting Israel, and they happened on his watch, and so that means he has to take responsibility for failing to protect the Israeli state and the Israeli people. And so to quickly jump to labeling the Hamas attacks as a consequence of a long-standing policy of Israel as a state, just the very existence of Israel being what caused the attacks, lets the right wing in Israel off the hook, and I think avoids the real political question in this moment, which is what needs to change now in order to start to solve the conflict between Israel and Palestine, which has been needing to be addressed in a serious way for decades and decades and decades. And but the major thing is that it's not at all the case that by pointing out the completely illegal, immoral, horrific character of the attack from Hamas, you are thereby siding with the reactionary forces in Israel, who will turn right around and eclipse the level of bloodshed in Gaza. That's just not the case. And in fact, recognizing the horrific nature of the attacks by Hamas might very well help to undo the power of the reactionary forces in Israel in the long run.
And I said that I wanted to come back to the anti-Semitism issue. That's been a disturbing thing. Like, again, back in the anti-American days, when it was cool to be anti-American, I've mentioned before, I loved NoFX, and NoFX had this cool punk rock anti-Americanism about them, this self-hatred of self-hating American. And even then, when you criticized Americans, you called them stupid. That was like the big thing, that Americans were stupid. Sorry, Doug. I apologize for saying this. I know this must hurt. You can come at me.
Two stereotypes around the world about Americans is that we're fat and we're stupid, and you might disagree. So,
but you are human. You might be fat, you might be stupid, but you are human. There were a lot of comments on our video that talked about and I saw this on comments on my Twitter and so on. Again, I know I need to touch grass, but we're just talking about the response to our stream, at least right now. And there were people who were saying, like, cockroaches. Do you know what I mean? Vermin.
Mm-hmm. In regards to the Israelis, particularly, yeah. Oh, hit the button again on your microphone, because you've gone off. Oh, I'm going to read this while I wait for your microphone to work. Ivan Ivanovich says, I really appreciate both of you oftentimes, but I think you're really missing the point right now. You shouldn't be responding to the most ridiculous extremes, but looking seriously at the conditions. Then he says, on the ground and addressing those conditions. Maybe those. Go ahead. Yeah, respond to that.
Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to say, like, it's just interesting that when you are mad at a country and its people, you still refer to them as people. But there were a lot of comments that were talking about cockroaches and vermin. And the other thing was what disturbed me too was not.
You're cutting out again. Well, I'm going to while you're cut out, I'm going to take the opportunity to say that the point about that what going on and on about is to address the critics that we had right out of the gate, in order to hopefully help people step out of the position of unthinkingly embracing Hamas as the only political force that is open to the Palestinians as and the only potential way for there to be a liberatory movement in Palestine, in the West Bank and Gaza, to intervene now and say, listen, we've heard your critiques. Here's our response. And then, yes, let's think about what the conditions on the ground are right now, rather than continuing to kind of in an unthinking way take new positions as if there were no consequences of the initial position. That I think was that didn't define the entirety of the left, but it defined a part of the left that might visibly call itself Marxist online, and it did come from our own audience. So that's why we're.
Yeah, I felt like I was like, man, everyone's like, oh, it's just a small number of leftists who are, celebrating these attacks. And I was like, yeah, and they're all concentrated on our stream.
No,
that's what I was thinking. Don't know how we managed to attract, but you can hear me now, right? I switched to my old crappy mic.
Someone says, don't drink your own KoolAid. The left is not supporting Hamas. You are lying. So, okay, wait a minute. Which is it? Did we drink our own KoolAid, or are we lying? I mean, what we're responding to again are the comments that we saw both on our own streams and in the comment section of the YouTube videos we released, and online on Twitter and on Facebook. For me, I'm old enough. I'm still on Facebook. I'm not responding to any official journal or statements. I mean, there was a section of the DSA that came out expressing this opinion as well, but that was at a protest.
And also, like Conrad was like, well, unfortunately, they're the ones who are supporting the cause, right? Like, there are loads of thinking people that came out and said, look, we have to support Hamas.
Right. I mean, look, there are a lot of people who think that this was a necessary attack, and that these are optimal conditions for socialism to develop. And I think there's a thought that either we want to see a regional war in order to shift power on the world stage, or we want to use this threat of a regional war as leverage to change the character of the Israeli government and to weaken the U.S. I think those are the two the kinds of more thoughtful far left positions.
Yeah. So the reason why we're responding to comments now is because it's because that's what we said we were going to do at the beginning of the stream. We said we were going to respond to the comments, and I'm actually really, really glad that our commenters right now are denying that this ever happened and that it matters at all. Because I was like ready to argue why it's crazy to support Hamas, why it's crazy to think that this attack was necessary. And everyone's like, oh, no one says that. So I'm like, okay, well, then there's no point in having an argument about it. But what's interesting, too, is like I had a clip. Whenever I have a clip go viral, somebody it'll always be like, someone says, no leftists say that. Nah. And then they'll be like, it'd be 50% of people telling me nobody's saying that. And then me arguing with the other 50% of people who are saying exactly that. And I'm just like, yeah. There you go. Yeah. You guys come together.
Yeah.
And I know, touch grass. The world isn't like this. Thank God the vast majority of people are not fucking bedroom dwelling people who identify with the left in their like death cult daydreams. Got it. I understand.
Can I do a sidebar? Then we can start, and then I'll really turn this over to you a bit more, or maybe altogether. I want to point out that while all of this is going on, while we're debating whether or not the left did take an initial pro-Hamas position, or just what's going on in Israel. There's another thing that's happening in the West, in Europe, and in the United States to a degree as well, probably through Europe, which is that pro-Palestinian positions are being censored. The French and the German governments have outright barred protests in support of Palestine. There was a communication to Twitter that pro-Palestinian content needed to be taken down. And in general, the fear of anti-Semitism and I think Islamophobia will both be used to suppress speech, and has already been used in a very massive way, actually, to curtail free expression and speech and conversation and thinking in the West. One thing I want to make clear is that I noticed that someone in the comments on the last video said Doug's totally silent on, I hadn't even been released another video yet, totally silent about the censorship of pro-Palestinian voices. And I'm like, I'm not, and I want to not.
Doug will never be silent. Where there is censorship, he's like.
Right. So
yeah, and that's something that's so counterproductive and so ridiculous as well. You almost feel like it's so stupid. You almost wonder if they're trying to empower the people that they want people to think that they're on the right side. I don't know. It's just such a fucking stupid thing to try to censor opposition, especially on this level. And it becomes like it makes it very, very clear, for me anyway, it seems to me that, actually, I don't know if this is clear, because you said this before, that you're not really sure where the world is in terms of escalating this conflict. But of course, as I keep saying, there is a certain powerful drive to escalate conflict, right? There's underlying drives that make world war more or less likely. And then there are powerful countervailing tendencies, like I could get blown up. My country could be the one that gets screwed. I could be the loser here. World destruction. So these sorts of things become very powerful sort of countervailing tendencies. You want to be on the outside. You want to keep your hands clean and supply as many weapons as you can without actually getting involved. If you can do that, you're in a good position. So there's a drive to sort of like make bullets, supply weapons, but to actually kind of escalate a conflict into something like country-on-country warfare, no, there isn't a huge amount of appetite for that. Oh, another fun fact about young Ashley, the leftist, what an idiot I was. I actually wrote an essay, an undergraduate essay that I'm surprised I didn't get kicked out of university for, justifying terrorism. Specifically for this reason, that country-on-country warfare is becoming less and less likely because of mutually assured destruction. So you are going to see more of this sort of non-state warfare, and we're going to have to develop different rules beyond like just war theory, that you have to recognize non-state actors as somehow combatants, and understand that this is the only way now that people can fight causes instead of country-on-country warfare. So I called the paper Justified Terrorism. Anyway, but now I don't think you need to justify terrorism, but I do think you need to recognize that country-on-country warfare is becoming less and less likely, and it starts to become minimized, and you start to, but still there's a powerful goad for conflict. And I think that this sort of censorship, a part of me, the conspiratorial part of me that still thrives, thinks that, it's like protecting that wonderful outrage that is so easy to push toward a new conflict, right? So if you want to get people on side, then you want to get them riled up about the right things, right? This is manufacturing consent. You want to manufacture consent for the right things. So you want to make sure that Russian atrocities in Ukraine get the most airtime, and to say anything else is repugnant and not allowed and worthy of censorship. And you want to make sure that a particular side gets the most amount of coverage, and the other side is associated with all sorts of horrible things. I don't know. I'm just riffing.
Well, the question around justified non-state actors doesn't even really apply here, given that Hamas is, the state in Gaza to the extent that there is one, right? And but what is a question is, to what extent can Israel claim that the destruction of Hamas is an act of self-defense? And to what extent will the UK and the United States, as two major players, back the attempt to destroy Hamas, given that in reality, Hamas is fully integrated into Gaza? There is at least enough support for Hamas in Gaza for Hamas to maintain power there. And given that, so the question is Iran saying, you have to do something about the humanitarian situation in Gaza and not, invade Gaza because of the humanitarian consequences, which will then put pressure from Iranian civil society on the Iranian government and force its hand to intervene? Or is there a desire from Iran to protect Hamas as a political force in Gaza as an extension of Iranian power? And, where is the negotiation point really going to end up being between Israel and Hamas? Because I don't think that if there's going to be de-escalation, that the true, total destruction of Hamas and as a political party is going to be on the table and through military action now. And so Biden and Keir Starmer both said that they supported the complete destruction of Hamas. But just what does that, what are the limits of that support really? Because they also talked about the need to be proportionate and to limit the number of civilian deaths and so on. So there's Biden has also said that he wanted to create regime change in Russia and get rid of Putin, but clearly that desire is constrained by political and military reality. He's not going to send U.S. troops into Russia just to do the job, right? So when Biden says that kind of thing, he's calling on the world community to provide support for an ongoing effort to alienate and undermine Putin's regime, not justifying a massive invasion to create regime change directly. And so it may be that Israel's aim to destroy Hamas is a long-term aim, and a political aim, meaning it will have to be worked out between all the different players, rather than a call to justify a massive invasion of Gaza and to try to kill them all right now. But it seems like the second option is what's being prepared for, and that's truly terrifying to me. Uh-oh, you're cut out again. I talk too long and then your microphone dies. So I'm going to throw up.
I changed my microphone and now it's still doing this. So I have absolutely no idea what's going on. Can you hear me now?
I can, yeah. What do you do to get it to work?
I just unmute myself. Like it says, we have the internet, it says the browser's lost connection with your microphone. And then I just hit unmute. But then I changed the microphone before. Like I thought that's what the problem was. Anyways, I don't know why. The technology evidently hates me. Anyway, what was I going to say? God, you know what? Since we talked about Ireland last week, I've been reading a lot about the Troubles, and I know that you can't make easy.
Hit unmute yourself again. Say something. No, still not working. Nico says, Doug, they're going to wipe these people out. Both you and the U.S. are living in a fantasy that Israel will care what the international community says. Well, if Nico is right, then our question is like, what does that mean in terms of Iranian power and and U.S. power? I mean, like, is it the case? I think that if it was the case that an Israeli invasion of Gaza would lead to a regional war with Iran and draw the United States into the conflict, the United States would make sure that Israel did not invade Gaza. So the calculation, if they knew that that was going to be the consequence, so the calculation would have to be, we can invade Gaza, Iran will not respond, and perhaps there will be some attacks from Hezbollah, but we will be able to weather them, and the balance of forces are such that we can get away with a full-scale invasion of Gaza with all the bloodshed and horror that will create, as long as we put on a good face of making some gestures towards the humanitarian corridor and the ethical treatment of refugees in Egypt, as long as we're not seen as dropping bombs literally on the heads of fleeing civilians and women and children as they try to escape Gaza, will be able to justify a full-on invasion. That may be what they're calculating is what they'll be able to get away with. I don't know there is nothing we can do, right? All we can do is try to describe what the reality is and what the different power players are thinking and what the limits are. But if it's the case that Israel does send in hundreds of thousands of troops after a humanitarian corridor is opened up, then that means that their calculation is that they can do that without escalating to a full-on regional war, I believe. But the other thing to realize is that Hamas made a different calculation. They think that the Israeli attacks on Gaza will escalate the conflict into a regional war, and that seems to be the purpose behind the original terrorist attack. So, if I were in power, I would certainly do everything I could to apply the brakes right now to Israel, because I would think that Hamas might be just as smart as we are. That they could very well be right, and I wouldn't want to play into their hands.
But Doug, if you were in power, you would have a bunker somewhere and a gold-plated jet to get you there, and you wouldn't give a shit if everybody died.
That would still play to win. And the other thing is about this is that the reason, again, we go back to, do we want to fully support Hamas, as a real question that we're exploring, not as a moral question, not asking, was that a moral action that they took, but rather, let's say we can use them. Let's say, okay, this happened. What do we hope the outcome is for our own political goals? And so do we think that a regional war that undermines U.S. power ultimately is what would be best for socialism, for the development of an international socialist movement for massive?
I just think the question of socialism here is so far off the table. And please tell me that I'm wrong about this. I would love to be wrong about this. We're not dealing with socialism. We're dealing with the mutual destruction of the contending. Like that is where we are right now. We are living in the world that happened when we failed. That's where we are. We're not asking the question of what would be the better outcome for socialism. We're asking, is this us heading toward our mutual annihilation? Because that is what capitalism does. The means, I wrote this on social media, but the means of production, when they can no longer be used for production profitably, become the means of destruction by any means and for whatever purpose necessary. That's where we are right now. We are not asking questions about socialism. Please tell me I'm wrong.
No, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I absolutely agree with you, but I just wanted to articulate the kind of thinking that might be going on right now, if not directly, but unconsciously, or amongst, in a lot of disguised ways. Like, I do think that a portion of the so-called socialist left doesn't think of socialism as the development of proletarian power, but thinks of it in terms of supporting the global South and particularly probably China, and that believes that the Chinese state is the most advanced force for socialism in the world, and therefore, if we support actions that will empower China as opposed to the United States, we will be furthering the cause of socialist revolution. I think that's the belief that people have, and so we need to say, okay, if we don't believe that, why not? And even before we get to why isn't China, rather than making it into a debate, is China socialist or not socialist? I mean, it doesn't even have to be socialist already, like fully developed, already existing socialism in China, for it still to be the most progressive force in the world. So the question is, what is the role of proletarian power and a socialist party supposed to be? How necessary do we think a free, politicized proletarian movement is to the development of socialism? If we don't believe it's necessary to have a free, politicized proletarian party and a proletarian movement in order to create socialist conditions, then it becomes a question of what kind of reformist fifth dimensional chess move do we want to make with the players that already exist. I think that the free proletarian politicized movement is the only hope for socialism. In fact, anything that doesn't see that has nothing to do with socialism. And that's why I'm so committed to free speech, is because that's baseline ground floor freedom that any proletarian movement has to have. And so.
Hey, I feel like the commenters misunderstood what I said, because they're all saying, Ashley, you're wrong. And then they're repeating what I think my argument was. Ashley, you're wrong. What we're doing is we're paying for the failure of socialist revolution in 1918 or 1917. Sorry. Yes. And Ashley, you're wrong because it's socialism or barbarism. Yes. Thank you.
So do you have some comments from last week that we might want to talk about briefly?
Okay, I have so many. So now, why
don't we bring them up?
Because we said that we were going to respond to comments. And then you also put World War III in there. So I was like, okay, we'll segue to that. And Doug will do his thing, and we'll talk about like the potential for escalation or not, or what's really going on here, and so on. And then I see all the commenters are like, why are you talking about internet leftism? I'm like, oh, well, then all of my preparation was for naught, okay? No, because I got all these quotes here that I wanted to read out, and I got called a dumb bitch, but who cares?
Really?
I get called a dumb bitch like 15 times a week. It's fine, but like, it's funny. I read mean comments to my husband, and he laughs a little bit too hard.
Yeah. But no, actually, you're wrong because you're right. Is the latest comment.
Anyways, in the parrot room, we will discuss. Right. We'll go further into some of these things. In particular, one comment that came up quite frequently was, which I mentioned at the start that I was going to respond to, and I didn't. Which is that as a Marxist, you always side with the most oppressed. That's just a no-brainer. That's not true. And I will show you areas where Marx and Engels didn't. And they appear very callous. And these are bits of Marx and Engels that are frequently misread. and misused, and you'll get them thrown at you by clueless right-wingers. They're taken out of context, but there are cases in which they appear to demonstrate a callous disregard for the most oppressed. Why is that? We will discuss in the Parrot Room.
Okay, I want to point out this. Thank you for the £5 chat, and I'll throw it on the screen to say a socialist revolution in America would open the doors for a more just world, but that is just daydreaming, nothing more. I'll just say that could be very well true, but that is the same holds for a socialist revolution in Palestine or China or Iran or Canada or France. At this moment, we're all just daydreaming. Maybe we can do better.
But, you know, I always said that if there was any possibility for a socialist revolution, it would come out of a major conflict. We'll talk about that also in the Parrot Room.
I always said that if there's any hope for a major revolution in the world, it will come out of Dallas, Texas. I didn't have a reason for saying that, but I've always said it. Okay, here we go.